Hey friends. Well, this is a recording of the Walla Walla Speaks gathering that we hosted on May 11th, which was a little while ago now. It took us a second to get this recording up because accidentally omitted the first 10 minutes of the meeting, forgot to click record. So what we're missing from this Walla Walla Speaks is mostly introduction. So we're going to do that for you, and we'll start with ourselves. I'm Pastor Leavitt Gibbons. I'm the associate here at Pioneer United Methodist Church, and this is my friend Zidane Gallant-Laporte. Zidane, do you want to introduce yourself and say hi?
Absolutely. Like Leave said, my name is Zidane, and I am the coordinator for the neighborhood engagement program over at the city of Walla Walla, and happy to be co-hosting Walla Walla Speaks with Leave.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 8 months now. We've talked about a whole host of justice issues in our community. We've talked about the sleep center, talking about homelessness. We moved on to incarceration. Then we talked about immigrants' rights with Walla Walla Immigrants' Rights Coalition and Central Washington Justice for Our Neighbors. We talked about population health with Becky Betts and HIV/AIDS and addiction recovery with Blue Mountain Heart to Heart. Talked about domestic violence with YWCA, Chinese American immigration with Wendy Chang. And last week we met with Police Chief Scott Bieber, Captain Chris Buttice, and members of the Chief's Advisory Committee to talk about policing in Walla Walla, the future of policing, and something called differential call response. Well, tonight's speakers, Police Chief Scott Bieber has been with the Walla Walla Police for over 9 years now. Before that, he was in, I think, Vancouver, serving as the police commander over there in the city of Vancouver, Washington. He was there for almost 3 decades, but now he's here with us and has been our police chief through some really interesting moments in history. He was joined by one of his captains, Chris Buttice, and also a couple of fellas named Steve Moss and Noah Leavitt. What do you know about those guys, Zidane?
Sure. So Steve Moss is a city council member and mayor pro tem for the city of Walla Walla. And then Noah Leavitt is a very active, well-connected community member. They both are members of the committee, and they also chair the differential response board or differential response working group that you hear about more in the Walla Walla Speaks, so I won't go into detail. But these two individuals are wonderful community members, and Steve worked previously with Blue Mountain Action Council, and Noah is also well connected within the Whitman College community as well.
Well, we'll turn you over to last week's conversation so that you can hear what they have to say and hopefully have some good takeaways from the conversation that was begun last week. And there will be resources at the very end of the recording. There are a number of documents and resources that are named in the or referenced in the conversation. We'll include those at the end of this recording. All right, well, enjoy.
Who represented a pretty broad spectrum of Walla Walla and get their input. Anybody else want to throw something out, Noah?
Sure. I was just thinking about what you said at the beginning in terms of the number of chiefs in the last almost half century and the leadership in the department. And obviously I haven't lived in the community that long, but I think one of the experiences that I've been able to have is to be able to kind of really look inside the department in a way that I don't think has been available to community members in quite a long time. And from what I've learned from talking to people who've lived here for the last half century, I haven't heard the police department being as available for questions and kind of information sharing and feedback as you've been able to open up this year. And so I think that that's just really important to notice that in the broad context of policing in Walla Walla, this has been a year of a lot of exchange. And Chief, you've been very generous about, being responsive to people's curiosities and the things that are on their mind, and, kind of looking for ways for people to bring you things that they're concerned about and being very open about them. So that's, I guess, the only other thing I would add there.
Thanks, Noah. I'm gonna jump in on the chat question there. Yeah, the faces on this Zoom don't look very diverse at this point, but If we were to run through the list of people that are on the executive or on the advisory committee, you'll see quite a bit of diversity. All of the advisory committee was invited to be on, to be involved in this. Steve and Noah are here mainly because they also spearhead the differential call response work group. So the two gentlemen that are here, Noah and Steve, do a lot of work right now on behalf of the advisory committee and the work group. But you know, I think we still have posted the names, and if not, I will make sure when I get back that we get those posted as to the entire makeup of the advisory committee.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, I think that was a follow-up question I had based off of your comment about the diversity. And I wonder if you could go a bit more into detail, not necessarily about the individuals who are on the committee, and anyone else also, but what makes them the right choice for determining how the policing should be in Walla Walla and be advising you? How are they kind of selected to be part of your committee?
Well, when I first set up the committee and I was looking at potential members, I wanted to look at, you know, diverse group of people, not only racially, but ethnically, and you know, we have representatives from the LGBTQ community. You know, we have a member who's retired from the Department of Corrections. He's not very diverse, but he's got a history of a long professional history of being involved in the criminal justice system. So I really did try, and I think I tried to go beyond cosmetic diversity, but also make sure that we covered a pretty broad spectrum of Walla Walla and people who were connected to the community in various ways. I know, you know, Noah will hate me saying this, but Noah is connected. He's not a representative from Whitman College on our committee, but he's connected to a lot of people at Whitman College. So, you know, that was one of the reasons. And I've known Noah, since I got here, Noah, right? I think 9 years ago we were introduced. So, you know, and I'll be perfectly frank, people that I'm fairly comfortable having uncomfortable conversations sometimes with. And I'll give you an example that our second meeting, I think we went over the use of force policy for the police department, and Dick Morgan, who is on the committee, the retired DOC secretary, basically came back and blasted us, saying there's a lot of wills and not shalls in here. So we went back and you know, took a look at that. But I want people like the people that are on the committee that aren't shy about, you know, telling me, hey, we got a concern about this, and here's our concern. And I think the people on the committee I don't think anybody on the committee is shy about doing that. And I'll be frank too. I tell my officers this as well, or all employees, not just the officers. You know, if I do something and you think I'm full of crap, I want you to come into my office, close the door, we'll have the conversation. We may not agree when you leave the office, but you've at least had your say, and we've discussed it and we've talked about it. So, you know, that's the approach I want to take with this committee too, is I want the committee members and encourage them to give me honest feedback and input.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. Well, you guys have been meeting since August of last year? Is that right? How long have you guys been together?
We just finished our 12th meeting. So yeah, I think we started up in April.
Okay.
of last year, April or May of last year.
And what's the experience been like? Tell me something, and anyone can chime in here. What's something that's like brought you a lot of hope about these conversations and the work of this committee, and maybe something that's been frustrating?
Let me jump in if I may, Leave. And while I sit on the city council and I relay information back to the council with regard to issues that we're discussing, I also feel like I have a little different perspective based on my career in the community, working with primarily lower income individuals from all backgrounds, with many issues that the police may overlap in. So I was pleased to be asked to be involved. The one thing I've been most impressed with, and as the chief alluded to, there's no holding back on questions, on issues, on data that we've asked for. I speaking for myself, I've learned a lot of kind of inside baseball of policing, if you will, even though I thought I knew many of the issues in Walla Walla. I've learned that I know those things from my perspective and maybe not from someone else's. And so that's been very encouraging for me to hear from different committee members and also hear as we've explored kind of probing issues. Just a reference to Noah and his engagement. He gives Kevin Bacon a bad name as far as 8 degrees of separation, because there are probably only 3 or 4 degrees for many of the people that we look to in the community for advice, for critique. And so I've been very encouraged by that. The one thing that has been frustrating for all of us has been the COVID and the fact that we started out meeting, I think we met 2 or 3 times in person, socially distanced, but in person. And then we had to go to meetings as we're meeting tonight over Zoom. And that has slowed us down a little bit. At the same time, it's allowed us, if I may, as we've explored best practices in some other communities that we've looked at, and ideas as far as potential recommendations, that's allowed us to maybe reach out to some communities that we, for cost or time reasons, would not have been able to. So some pluses and minuses there.
Yeah. And well, clearly differential response has been a real important point for you guys. Let's talk about it. What is it and why is it important? And how might it be implemented here in Walla Walla?
I'll jump in real quick and then I'll let Noah tell you about their efforts. Real quickly, you may remember during the town halls last year, one of my comments was, if I never have to send a police officer to a threatened suicide or a mental health call again, I'm all in. But we need to know who's going, who has the capacity to go, who has the willingness to go and handle those calls. Unfortunately, the police have become the 24-hour default because we work 24/7 and 911 gets the call and we get dispatched. But, in a lot of those cases, we're not the best resource to go handle those calls. So what the committee's looking at is, what is the best resource? Is the best resource even available in Walla Walla? And if not, how do we develop that resource? And with that, I'll turn it over to Noah and Steve to talk about that.
Sure, thanks, Chief. I mean, very early on, there was a question about for officers who are trained to prevent and solve crime, what is the best use of their expertise and training and talents in the context of all of the, as Chief is saying, all of the things that the police department gets calls to try to sort out. And so one of our guiding questions has been, are there any other options available when thinking about what happens when a person who's having a mental health episode downtown and is behaving in ways that are perhaps stressing out community members or people on the streets, or people around them? Is the right response to help that person address what's happening to them in the immediacy and also in the future, having some an officer with a gun come out and try to help solve them, when that's not something that an officer has necessarily been involved in thousands of hours of training and kind of learning and practice and simulations. Is that what they've been focusing on? So I guess we've been trying to figure out what are all of the instances that the police department is called on to try to help sort out or solve, and what is the subset of those where there may be other kinds of expertise or training or talent or experience that may be more appropriate to bring in. And so I'm sure a number of people on this call have been kind of tracking around the country. That's a question that a lot of communities are looking at, which is, what's the best fit possible so that somebody can be responded to in a way that's going to be helpful and safe and help kind of everyone involved kind of move to a different outcome. And how will community resources be best utilized? So our work group has been trying to figure this out for Walla Walla, for the city of Walla Walla, for the kinds of calls that come into the police department and the kinds of situations that we see here. Is there any other kind of option that will lead to better community outcomes and also allow our amazing police officers to do really what their role is for all of us, which is to deal with criminal issues, either pending or potentially future? So we've been looking at, as Councilmember Moss mentioned, how this balance is being looked at in other places around Washington State and in communities kind of like ours. And we have some ideas about what some options might be here, but they're just ideas, and they have to go to council and city leadership and potentially the voters. But there may be some other ways that we can, as Walla Walla, think about how to be compassionate and kind, but also, use talent and expertise in the best possible way.
Wonderful. Thank you for those reflections. And it sounds like to me, with what Chief Bieber, what you're saying, and Noah, what you're saying with this advisory board and with this work group, is that there's some questions about what policing looks like in Walla Walla and what it should look like in Walla Walla moving forward. So I'm curious, maybe Chris, Captain Buttice, if you want to talk about this too. What do you kind of see as the future of Walla Walla Police, taking from, you have had a year of this advisory committee. Obviously the work is not done yet, but you've had 12 meetings, and I'm sure things have happened there and conversations have happened there. So what do you see as kind of the future of the Walla Walla Police, knowing what you know from these boards and from these kind of observations about what people need when they're being responded to, if that makes sense?
Well, I know we had a great privilege of having the team look at the call differential response and try and really understand what calls we're responding to. And again, if we can divert the calls that we don't need to go to, we get the appropriate help for somebody. We don't want to say no to people when they're in crisis or in need. But if we're not the best response, this team, this group is looking at our future of how do we deal with this moving forward. And again, kind of the history I've had being here at the department is if somebody calls for help, you go help. And we're still going to do that. And that's still going to be our mission. Our core values are service, pride, and integrity. And we're still going to serve. We're going to do it with pride. And we're going to for the utmost importance is our integrity and how we do that. But moving forward, it's going to be critical in utilizing this team, this group, to continue to convey the message of the police department, to get the message of the community, and to work together. It's been a great opportunity for us to have community engagement. COVID hit, and it really presented the challenge of the face-to-face what we're really good at is seeing people and sitting down and having great open conversations. And moving forward, I see the conversations continuing to be open, honest, even the difficult ones. We're not going to shy away from them. We want to work with the community. We want the best for what's going on in Walla Walla and for the citizens. So having the opportunity to work with great people who are vested. Noah and Steve and Curtis have been so amazing in their diligence and looking and learning to understand looking to understand what we do. So moving forward, I just see that continuing to grow, and I'm just optimistic that as soon as the legislation passes all the mandates and updates, we're going to bring in the appropriate training to train the new standards. And I invite the change and look forward to what the future has with this team.
There's a couple of initiatives that have come online since the committee started. One of them is the LEADS program, which is the diversion, law enforcement assisted diversion for mental health. So, and I've told people this for years and years since we closed most of the mental health facilities back in the late 80s and mid 90s, because there were problems with those facilities. Rather than fix those facilities, we closed those. And I told people all along, look, if you don't think we're housing the mentally ill, look in jails and prisons. We just switched where we were housing the mentally ill. And then we got police involved in doing that. We need to take, 3 steps backwards and say, how do we best treat these people at the community level and get them the mental health services they need at the community level so that the police aren't involved, and that the people that need the help aren't going to jail where they're not going to get the treatment, or prison where they're not going to get the treatment. How do we take those steps backwards and correct the things that happened in the late 80s and 90s? And unfortunately, I've been around long enough to have seen all that professionally happen. I started my career in 1985. So, I saw all that happen and where we've come. We are also, and I made the mistake of not communicating this quickly enough because I noticed an email from Noah today who found the grant that was put out by WASPEC for mental health co-responding for police departments to apply. And yes, we have Captain Brayman working with Comprehensive Mental Health on writing a grant application for that and seeing how we can put together a program that, where we can co-respond or maybe crisis intervention. We determine at 911 who goes and how it gets dispatched and all of that. So there's a lot of things that are actually happening already that we're trying to do. The differential call response work group keeps going, keeps working, and we keep looking at all the different models that are out there and trying to decide what's best for Walla Walla and how do we make that happen.
And it looks like Noah, in case you guys didn't notice, in the chat, Noah's been posting some good resources for us. He just put up the Washington Association of Sheriff and Police Chiefs a release there on mental health field response teams. And also you can read the minutes of the police chiefs advisory committee. They're really fun to read, actually. So don't be deterred by minutes. They're exciting. So give those a look. That's the other link.
Pastor Leave, if I could just make one comment, I think following up on the chief's last set of ideas.
Of course.
There's a great book that probably some people on this call either have read or might want to read. And I think Councilmember Moss actually brought this to my attention. It's by a faculty member at the Georgetown University Law School, a journalist and lawyer named Rosa Brooks. And she's very interested in law enforcement. And she wound up taking the opportunity to participate in a program that the Metropolitan DC Police Force has to allow civilians to be trained and be immersed in the entire training program that the Metropolitan Police Force uses, and then participate as volunteers in the exact same way that officers do. They're licensed to carry a weapon and participate in all the calls. I mean, she spent 2 years in this training, and she writes about how much she learned about policing. And she was a law professor who focused on kind of police violence and law enforcement and, racial disparities in criminal justice systems. I mean, she was like an expert in all of this. But she said it took her 2 years of being embedded in a police force to really be able to feel like she could say anything with any authority. And to some extent, Council Member Moss raised this too, and I definitely feel this. What our police force and our officers control in terms of the kinds of information and the legislation that they're responsible for carrying out and the parameters is so complex that, to some extent, our work group has been sort of a learning environment for all of us, just to be able to say anything about like what would a reasonable set of options be for our community, because without knowing all of these state directives and policy initiatives and priorities and how the city has set up the way that police are able to work, we're not really able to say anything particularly useful. And so I know some people have said like, well, we were hoping for a bunch of decisions right away, but I think we feel like we need to be responsible to have a certain baseline of education about what we're saying, is the set of options for our community, for all of these different factors that influence what policing looks like. And I think, we would worry about saying too many things right away without taking all of that into account. And that's why with even differential call response, our work group, we've been very privileged to have officers and the captain and some of the sergeants and the dispatch from Westcom helping us understand what it is we're looking at and reading and what are all these reports, what do they mean? Because, it'd probably be malfeasance to make some suggestions without really being able to have control of that. So anyway, it's a great book. It's called Tangled in Blue. And, anybody who's interested in this for Walla Walla or anywhere else, super recommended. So just wanted to put that out there as kind of, we're all trying to pay attention to what does it mean to think about police reform.
If I could just follow up to Noah's comments.
Of course.
As we've looked at several communities, both in the state of Washington and then some examples nationwide, but two of the Washington state cities, the city of Olympia and the city of Port Angeles. The city of Olympia has been involved in differential call initiatives, if you will, and for about 3.5 years. And some of the issues that they thought they needed to respond to in a certain way, 2 or 3 years later, well, they've gained some insight as to maybe how to improve that. So I'm certainly hoping to learn from their education curve so we can maybe speed ours up. Earlier on, you mentioned made reference to maybe our beginning in August. We did have a pretty thorough and thoughtful, in my mind, outreach to the community over 3 different sessions beginning in August. And that opened my eyes, and I think others, both on the council, in the department, and in the community, as to some other things that we needed to look at.
Were these the town halls?
These are the town halls.
Okay, yeah.
And so as we start to formulate some early on recommendations, and we're just in discussions now as to how to present those back to the council and management with the city. We're planning on another community outreach, tentatively set for the latter part of June. So stay tuned for that, so we can interact again with the community in a thoughtful fashion, give a little more details with regard to what we have learned, our recommendations. And we purposely were waiting. Captain Buttice made reference to the legislature. The Washington State Legislature has finalized their session. They've come up with some new pieces of law that need to be understood as to how they would apply to the city of Walla Walla, what financial implications there may be. And then, of course, many of the viewers are probably aware that the federal government is also looking at maybe some legislation, and well, not holding my breath that might happen before the end of June or whenever when we do finalize this presentation. But we want to take into account some of the things that may likely impact our community as well. So more to come.
Thank you so much. Well, I didn't realize that the time is flying. This is so exciting. I'm going to pitch a couple of questions from the chat. And thank you so much, friends, for these excellent questions. These are great questions from our attendees. So Beth asked the great question. Yep, we're looking pretty white tonight. Tell us about diversity. We talked a little bit about that and the different layers of diversity. But I've got a question from Mark about the committee and its control and authority. So does the committee have any enforcement or accountability powers over the police department, or are there ideas and the demands from the community implemented only at the discretion of the chief? Why or why not? So does that question make sense? Does the committee have enforcement powers?
No, it's an advisory committee, and kind of going back to what one of the things Noah said earlier is I've been doing this business 36 years. I want to get as much input as I can to make the best decisions that I can, but I'm also the one who has the responsibility, the job to make those decisions. And as much as I want the input and the advice and looking at various ways of doing things or perceptions of what's going on so that I can make the best decisions, I still am ultimately responsible for making those decisions. So, and unfortunately in a department like the police department, you really can't run it by committee. There are things that you can run by committee. There are things that I put out that I let a committee an internal committee give me advice. I tell them, look, I get to make the final decision because that's my position, but I usually don't go against what the committee advises because they usually have good reasons and good information that they've given me. So there's no reason for me to, make a decision that's totally 90 degrees of what they said. And, the same goes with this committee. We're having some, some discussions, and even early on, I may have some disagreements with the work, the differential call work group and what they're kind of looking at, and maybe how I'm looking at it. But we're gonna work through that. We're gonna hash it out. We're gonna have those discussions. But ultimately, the bottom line is, I'm the one that is responsible for making the decision and running the police department day to day.
So not like a civilian review board might be a group that has some authority, right? That's not what we have here.
No, we don't have a civilian review board. And here's my concerns with civilian review. And I don't have a problem with it, maybe a civilian review board. The problem is that civilian review boards, in my experience, try to move beyond review, and they want to be a civilian decision board. There are too many things that go on in police work. Most people don't understand the reasonable officer standard, which is a legal standard. And you have to apply that when you're making discipline decisions. You have to apply, and most people probably don't know, the 7 tests of just cause. Most people maybe don't understand these are not at-will employees. These are union employees, and I have a collective bargaining agreement that I have to take into consideration when I'm making all kinds of decisions. So, you know, just like I wouldn't go tell the public works director how to run the water treatment plant, because guess what? I have no idea how to run the water treatment plant. I do want input, you know, from the community, because we interact daily, hundreds and hundreds of times daily with the community, and we're responsible for, you know, the safety of the community. So yes, I definitely want that input, but you know, there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes in terms of the complexity, and hopefully Noah, you'll echo that, the complexity of this job. I say to people all the time, if you really want to see how our officers interact with the community, please come down and take a ride along. Please sign up for it used to be called the Citizens Academy. It's now called the Community Police Academy. You know, COVID has taken a bite out of that. We can't do that right now, but as soon as the COVID protocols are over, I want people coming in to ride along. I almost have an expectation that our advisory committee members will do that, so they have a firsthand knowledge of what our officers do day to day and how they interact with people. And so I've probably spoken enough on that.
That is all good. We appreciate your insight. I think maybe you and Chris can go into this a bit, but I'm wondering, you know, we have a question in the chat from Beth asking about to whom are you responsible when you say you're responsible for making decisions? And I'm also wondering, you know, are there unions involved? Is there the police officers plus our community members that you're saying you're responsible to?
Accountable to, yeah, accountability.
Yeah, and accountability.
Well, my ultimate accountability as far as my position is to Nabil Shahwa, the city manager. Nabil has the authority to hire and fire me. So that's who I'm ultimately accountable professionally for my position. We as a department are definitely accountable to the community. You know, issues that come up, complaints that come up, we are accountable for investigating those timely, thoroughly, and objectively, and getting back to the people who have filed those. I can tell you that over the last 5 years, while we have tracked thank yous and kudos and complaints, that we have run about, Chris, is this number right, 7-1 on thank yous and kudos versus complaints? And, you know, we try to track that. I can also tell you that as far as sustained complaints, we usually have about maybe 6 or 7 internal affairs investigations a year, and maybe one of those is sustained based on the evidence. So yes, we're accountable to the community. We're also accountable, I'm accountable to basically 2 police unions, or, you know, the civilians in the police department, and also the commissioned officers. And I'm, you know, accountable to the other non-represented employees of the police department as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take another question from the chat. This one's really interesting. I must have missed these news pieces, but okay. Clint asks, having been at a demonstration at the Walla Walla police station and Black Lives Matter in Pendleton, Oregon during the summer of 2020, open carrying was handled very differently by law enforcement at these 2 events. You want things to say about that?
Yeah, I haven't read the article, and I didn't talk to the Pendleton chief, but I'm not familiar with the open carry laws in the state of Oregon. I am familiar with the open carry laws in the state of Washington. And to be perfectly frank with you, there was a legislative bill that was introduced to the legislature. It died before any coming out of committee, but that would have banned open carry at demonstrations. And I'm fully behind that. When I walked out of the police department during the rally that I think this gentleman is talking about, and I only saw one person carrying, actually I saw two people with open carry. One had a AR-15 who was standing on the far west side of the crowd. And then there was another person that I saw that had a small pistol that was in the back of his waistband that most people probably wouldn't have even noticed, but I did. That's part of my job to notice those things. But in the state of Washington, that is totally legal. And I don't have the right to go tell them, you need to put that away. I can politely ask them, and if they choose not to, that is their right in the state of Washington. I think we in the state of Washington have the right to limit, but you cannot do it at a local level. All gun laws are preempted by the state. The state legislature is the only agency that can make gun laws. So they have made gun laws that don't allow you to carry into bars. They don't allow you to carry them into live sporting events. Where else, Chris?
Schools.
Schools. Yeah, absolutely. I should have remembered that one right away.
I remember it from the minutes.
Yeah. So there are opportunities at the state level to ban open carry at different events. And if that bill comes back next year in the legislature, I'm all for it. Let's face it. I don't want, in what is usually a fairly emotional setting anyway, I don't want a firearm introduced to that setting. But unfortunately, in this instance, I don't have a say in that.
So just to,
I did see that. Let me grab that really quick, Steve. I believe it's not legal to open carry in a threatening manner. Well, it's not illegal. It's not legal. I'm sorry. It is illegal to menace. And what we have to prove is that you're menacing with that weapon. Simply because I am not comfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable. And trust me, folks, it makes me uncomfortable when I go to a demonstration and I see people with an AR-15. That makes me uncomfortable, but that's not menacing. And that's not threatening per se under the state law. So I hope that answers the question. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
no, Chief, I just wanted to reiterate again that the state of Washington, and I don't know, not familiar with other states, but the state of Washington does preempt any local decision-making. Certainly at the city council, or during my tenure, we've had several thoughtful discussions with the chief, with the city attorney, with regard to how we might best deal with demonstrations, demonstration volatility, those kinds of things. But please, as advocates, be aware that the state legislature has that authority and that sole authority. And so weigh in with our legislators and make your voices known. I know I did a couple of times during the session. And hopefully I don't see that particular issue going away. I think it probably will be reviewed in coming sessions. So keep that in mind.
Great, thank you. I think we only have a couple of minutes left, so we'll try to wrap it up. But we've gotten a question from Victoria asking, and this is kind of going off of your last comment, Councilman Moss, but what can community members do who aren't necessarily on the advisory board to help continue to move this conversation about differential call responses in a progressive direction? And then how can they be involved in pushing local leadership to take action? It sounds like, Chief Bieber, you mentioned that going on rides would be an option. Obviously, COVID, that is preventing us right now, but hopefully if people are vaccinated and all that can happen. But I'm wondering if Noah or Chris or Steve have other ideas about ways that community members can get involved with moving this conversation forward if they aren't on the board.
Well, I'll start, and my email, my city email is available on the city website. Please make me aware. Back to the chief's comment, I know that whenever he gets questions from advisory committee members, others in the community, he's very good about responding. Presence of mind and thoughtful direction or concerns are always taken very seriously by me, and I know others on the council and the committee. So please make your issues known, and also know that this is not an end date that we're talking about with our report in June or July. We will continue on, and if we've learned nothing else, in my opinion, that we know of all the issues and the horrific things that have happened in the last year. Maybe we're more aware of them because of COVID and more people being isolated. At the same time, I've also come to realize that we have one of the better police forces, in my opinion, in the country. We can do better. We can always do better, and we want to know how to best do that. So that's just an open invitation to stay in touch.
Thank you.
I would say, I know there are a lot of questions that we didn't really get to, but my email address is S as in Scott, Bieber as in Justin, at wallawallawa.gov. Walla Walla WA is all one word. We're going to ruin your keyboard with W's, A's, and L's, but sbieber at wallawallawa.gov. If you had a question, oh, there it is. Thank you. If you have a question, I'm on vacation until next Monday, and then I'm going to be playing catch up. But if you had a question that you didn't get answered and you want to reach out to me by email, please feel free to do so. If you don't feel comfortable yourself, reach out to Noah, reach out to Steve. They usually do a really good job about forwarding those questions on to me, and I get them back to them, the answers, as quickly as I can. So if you have a question and you didn't get it answered, please reach out and we'll I'll get back to you with an answer. And thank you so much for having us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are so grateful that you joined us tonight. Before we go, though, one thing that I do hope that we continue to talk about, and this is what you guys work on every day, but for those of us who just get to listen in tonight and on occasions like this one, tell us about the future of policing. There were great questions in the chat about the really troubled history of policing and all of the things that do need to be abolished. And I think, Steve, yes, we have an excellent police force here that is trying really hard, and this committee is evidence of that. But as your parting gift to us, to all of us who've come here tonight, I would love to hear what needs to be abolished and what must remain. So share with me, kind of just as your parting gift to us. What do you want to carry with you into the future of policing, and what do you want to leave behind?
Well, I tell people all the time, it's about organizational culture. And policing differs significantly, although there's a lot of similarities. policing differs significantly from region to region. The level of training, the level of ongoing training, you name it, the pay and benefits, there, and then culture and organizational culture. And what needs to happen is we in police work need to start being more values-based organizations. And our culture has to live by and exhibit those values that our organization has. And I think your outcomes are going to be what you look for. If your outcomes aren't what you want, then you need to back up and look at the behavior and what's causing that behavior. And you know, that comes down to your culture. Are you hiring people who live your values, not only at work, but away from work? Are you training them properly? Are you, you know, I can do a dissertation on organizational culture because it's one of my big points is we have to have a culture that respects every member of our community and respects humanity and treats people fairly. And, you know, I can go on, but I think police work as a whole needs to really look at their organizational culture and make sure that you're doing the right thing and you're doing things correctly and right. And that comes down to culture. I said after the George Floyd homicide, look, if I were to, and I don't know what Minneapolis's use of force policy is or was, but I bet you if I compared their use of force policy to our use of force policy, there were great similarities. What differs is the implementation of those policies and the culture that allowed something like that to occur. That incident didn't happen in a vacuum. That happened in a culture. And that's one of the things going forward that we in policing have to really work on is organizational culture. I'm done. I've talked enough.
Thank you. Chris, what are you going to leave behind? What do you hope we carry with us, and what's waiting for us in terms of policing?
The chief knows what's important to me, and he already hit on it, and he kind of stole some of the thunder. But moving forward, what we won't ever allow to happen in our department, as long as I'm there, and I know as long as the chief's there, is we aren't going to just hire people just to have people. They have to be qualified. They have to be the right fit. And we're going to do our extreme vetting process that we've continued to do. So I can say years and years and years and years ago, hiring police officers, if you were qualified, you came in, you had your academy, they hired you. If you're not the right fit and you don't live into our core values of service, pride, and integrity, today we don't want you, and we don't want you going forward. So we made a commitment to the department. We made a commitment to city employees that we aren't going to just hire just to hire. And we've proven that by leaving vacancies for months and months and months because we don't have the right people, and we're looking for the right people to serve our community. Because again, in the end, it's all about relationships, and that's what we're here to do, is to keep the relationship with the community and to serve.
What about you, Steve?
Well, I would echo that we want to hire the right people with the attitude, skills, and motivation. And I would add one more. I would like to see over time, our police force represent the demographics of our community, as far as ethnicity and other backgrounds.
Thank you, Steve. Noah?
I'm going to steal Noah's thunder real quick.
Yes,
Sorry,
thanks.
Noah, I
That's
gotta
great.
jump in on
Okay,
that.
you're the chief.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on what Steve said. We have openings right now. We are testing the end of June. Applications are being taken. We try very hard, especially to get, since our community is so Latino, Latina, we really work hard to get bicultural, bilingual candidates to come take the test. We would love to see you at our testing process. If you have any questions, get a hold of myself, get a hold of Chris. If you know somebody that's interested, we'll be happy to sit down and talk with you. And we do have a committee that actually does some outreach, and they do a meeting every year to kind of demystify that testing process. So yes, we would love to get a better representation of our community.
Noah?
I mean, I guess looking at it as just a resident of Walla Walla, I mean, I want to live in a place where every single individual who is in the city feels safe and included, and feels like if they are having trouble, they are going to have somebody come to their assistance who has the right training and expertise and disposition to help them in that moment and in the future. And, you know, that's how I think about what it means to have law enforcement here, along with all kinds of other supports and services that the city and other of our community organizations have to provide. And, you know, how does all that fit together? So I guess, you know, for me, policing is something that is a part of a larger fabric of a community that allows everybody to just, as I said at the beginning, thrive and feel like we can be productive and feel like we belong and feel like we have something to contribute, and will be respected for that.
Thanks, Noah. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, friends, for staying late with us. It's been a good conversation, and there's so much more to talk about, and some really critical conversations to have. But thank you for taking time to come chat with us. I hope that the conversation continues, and bless you in all of your work, and pray that we live into those values of integrity and service and diversity and equality. Okay, well, good night, my friends. We'll see you next time, whenever that is. Okay, and thank you to our
Thank you.
panel. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.